Right now, in 4 American cities sit 4 of the most powerful warships ever built. By law, the United States is required to keep them ready to be called back and sent to war. There is just one problem. If that call came tomorrow, not one of them could fire a shot. Not because they're rusted wrecks, these ships are polished, painted, and gleaming. Not because the guns are broken, the guns work perfectly. The reason is stranger and far more unsettling than that. America can no longer build what these ships need. Not the shells, not the powder, not the barrels, not even the men who know how to run them. It would cost billions just to try, and even then it might be flatly impossible. Not difficult, not expensive, impossible. The country that built the Iowa-class battleship has quietly forgotten how. And the strangest part? We did it to ourselves. We gave the pieces away. This is the story of the 5 things America lost, and why the mightiest guns it ever put to sea can never speak again. First, understand why this even matters, because these are not ordinary retired ships. The 4 Iowa-class battleships, the Iowa, the New Jersey, the Missouri, and the Wisconsin, are 887 feet of armored steel, nearly 3 football fields long, displacing around 58,000 tons. Each carries 9 16-inch guns that could hurl a shell the weight of a small car more than 20 miles. They fought through 4 wars, the Pacific, Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf, and not one of them was ever lost to an enemy. And here's the part that sets up everything else. When the Navy finally paid them off in the early 1990s, Congress refused to let them go. Lawmakers wrote it into federal law in 1996. At least 2 of these battleships had to be kept in fighting condition, held on the Naval Vessel Register, until the fleet could prove it had surface firepower to match them. It never could. For years, the Iowa and the Wisconsin sat on that list, officially in reserve, officially retained for reactivation in case of full mobilization. So on paper, to this day, these ships are supposed to be ready, but paper and reality are 2 very different things, and the gap between them is where this story lives. Start with the guns themselves, because this is the detail that stops people cold. A 16-inch gun barrel is a monster, 68 feet long, weighing around 120 tons, machined to a tolerance finer than most people imagine. And here's the thing about barrels, they wear out. Fire them enough and the rifling erodes, the barrel has to be replaced. In their fighting days, the Navy kept spare barrels in storage, ready to swap in. So where are those spares now? Gone. No one has manufactured a new 16-inch 50 caliber barrel in decades. The tooling is gone, the foundries are gone, the craftsmen are gone. And the spare barrels that did exist? America gave them away. Starting around 2011, as the Navy purged its battleship inventory, those irreplaceable barrels were handed out to veterans groups, memorials, and parks. The very last spare. A 68-foot, 120-ton barrel from the USS Iowa, the final one left in a storage yard in Chesapeake, was handed to a preservation group to be trucked off and displayed near a historic lighthouse at Cape Henry, Virginia. Even that took special permits and heavy lift equipment just to move a single gun barrel. The people who saved them said it plainly. Why cut priceless artifacts into chunks of scrap steel? So they didn't. They scattered them across the country to parks and memorials where they sit today as monuments, not spares. Think about that. To fire these ships again, you would have to build a barrel factory that hasn't existed for half a century, retrain a workforce that retired long ago, or drive around the country park by park asking towns to give their monuments back. That is not a budget problem. That is a problem no amount of money can simply buy its way out of. Say you somehow solved the barrels. You still couldn't fire a single round because of something most people would never guess: silk. A 16-inch gun isn't loaded with a metal cartridge. Behind the shell go 6 massive cloth bags of gunpowder, each weighing about 110 pounds. And those bags are made of silk, not for luxury, for survival. Silk is the one fabric that burns away completely when the charge fires, leaving no smoldering ember behind. Use cotton, use synthetic, leave any glowing residue in that breach, and the next powder bag you load could cook off and detonate, turning the turret into a bomb. So the bags had to be silk. And here is the problem. No factory on Earth still makes them. The powder itself is just as bad. The United States stopped manufacturing this specific smokeless propellant back around the Korean War. That's right, the newest battleship powder in America is over 70 years old. What's left sits sealed in silk bags in ammunition depots in Indiana, Oklahoma, and Nevada, slowly aging. The Navy tests it constantly at its laboratory at Indian Head, Maryland, and it throws out roughly 1 lot in every 50 because the chemical stabilizers have decayed past the point of safety. The surviving lots have to be tumbled and reblended, like sifting flour, just to make them burn evenly enough to trust. And this isn't a theoretical danger. When the explosion tore through Turret 2 aboard the USS Iowa in 1989 and killed 47 men, the age of that World War II-era powder was one of the leading suspects investigators kept circling back to. Every year there is less of it, it grows a year older, and there is no way on Earth to make more. Then there are the shells themselves, and this is where it turns almost tragic. Those 2,700-pound projectiles, each the weight of a small car, are no longer in production and haven't been for generations. The rounds still sitting in storage are the same 1950s vintage shells the battleships fired in the 1980s and 1990s. Projectiles weighing anywhere from 1,900 to 2,700 pounds each. They are now over 60 years old, and rather than preserve them for some future recall, the Navy has been doing the opposite, moving to demilitarize and dispose of the remaining stock, cutting up the very ammunition these guns would need. Restarting production isn't a matter of flipping a switch. You would have to rebuild the entire supply chain, the forges, the machine shops, the quality control, all to make a shell for a weapon nobody else on Earth uses in tiny batches. And we already know exactly how that math ends. When the Navy tried to buy specialized shells for its modern Zumwalt destroyer, the cost spiraled past $800,000 per round, and the Navy canceled the gun rather than pay it. A revived 16-inch shell would be no different. A bespoke round, built in tiny numbers, for a gun no one else on the planet fires. The ammunition alone would be unaffordable before the ship ever left the pier. You would have the most powerful naval guns ever built and nothing safe to load into them. And that word, unaffordable, is where the dream really dies. Let's talk about what this would actually cost. Back in the 1980s under President Reagan, the Navy did bring all 4 of these battleships back. It was not cheap even then. Reactivating and modernizing the 4 of them ran about $1.7 billion in 1980s money. That was with the shells still in stock, the powder still stable, the barrels still available, and thousands of sailors still trained to run them. Today, you would have none of that. You would be paying to recreate entire industries from scratch, to build barrels, weave silk, forge shells, and rebuild steam plants before you could even think about the ship itself. And for what? A government accountability study in 2005 looked hard at this very question and concluded flatly that defense officials did not consider reactivating the battleships cost-effective. The ships were expensive to operate, hungry for manpower, and armed with guns whose range and accuracy belonged to another era. And the corrosion problem alone, they warned, only grows worse every year the ships sit. Every dollar poured into one of these giants is a dollar not spent on a submarine, a destroyer, or a drone. The numbers don't just lean against a comeback, they slam the door. But suppose money were no object. Suppose you rebuilt the barrels, the powder, the shells. You would still hit a wall deep inside the ship, in the engine rooms. The Iowa-class battleships don't run on modern gas turbines. Their hearts are enormous oil-fired steam boilers, Babcock and Wilcox plants that boil water into high-pressure steam to drive the turbines. It's a technology the United States Navy walked away from generations ago, and running a steam plant like this is a craft, a hot, dangerous, deeply specialized skill passed down from sailor to sailor. That chain has been broken for 30 years. The men who truly knew these boilers are retired or gone, and the Navy stopped training their replacements decades ago. These are hand-tended machines that demand constant judgment, the right feel for pressure, temperature, and timing that only comes from years at the throttle. You could hand a modern crew, trained entirely on gas turbines and computers, the keys to a battleship, and most of them would have no idea how to safely light those boilers, let alone nurse the whole steam plant through a storm at sea. The knowledge didn't get written down, it walked off the ship with the last crew. And that points to the fifth and final barrier, the people and the passage of time. A modern destroyer goes to sea with a few hundred sailors. An Iowa-class battleship needed around 1,800, an entire floating town of specialists, gunners, boiler technicians, and machinists, most trained on skills the Navy no longer teaches. You cannot simply order 1,800 sailors to crew a museum, and time is doing its own quiet work. Salt air never stops. Visit the museum ships today, and the caretakers will tell you the truth behind the fresh paint. The hulls are corroding. On one of them, preservation reports describe pitting along the waterline with more than a quarter-inch of steel eaten away. Volunteers fight a losing battle against rust just to keep a single stripped-down ship afloat at a calm pier. One writer who toured the battleship Iowa in California came away impressed, grateful, and a little sad, watching a small crew of volunteers fight salt air and rust just to hold the line. If a museum can barely keep one stripped-down ship alive at a calm pier, imagine trying to make 4 of them battle-ready in an age of missiles. The ships look eternal from the dock. Underneath, they are slowly, steadily returning to the sea. So here's the strange contradiction at the center of it all. For nearly 20 years after these ships retired, the law still insisted they be kept ready to fight. When the last 2 were finally handed over to become museums, Congress wrote the condition right into the deal. The ships had to stay fit for service, and the Navy could recall them in a national emergency. It went so far that even the donated gun barrels and shells were, on paper, still recallable. The requirement to keep the Wisconsin ready wasn't fully lifted until December of 2009. For 2 decades, on paper, these were battle-ready warships of the United States Navy, listed and retained for the day the nation might need them again. In reality, quietly, out of public view, the ability to arm them, fuel them, and crew them had already died. It was a promise the country could no longer keep, a legal ghost of a capability that had quietly ceased to exist. Step back and you see that this was never really about 4 ships. It's about what a nation can do and what it forgets. Every one of these barriers, the barrels, the silk, the shells, the steam, the crews, is the same story told 5 different ways. An entire industrial world that America built, used, and then let dissolve. The foundries that forged 16-inch barrels retooled or closed. The mills that wove powder silk moved on. The schools that trained boilermen shut their doors. None of it was lost in a disaster. It simply aged out, one factory and one veteran at a time, until the knowledge was gone. That's the uncomfortable truth these gleaming museum ships are hiding. The battleship didn't just become obsolete. The industrial civilization that could produce one, on demand, is no longer here, and almost nobody noticed the day it slipped away. There was no ceremony for it, no headline, just a last barrel trucked to a park, a last lot of powder tumbled and tested, a last boiler man walking down the gangway for the final time. Now, some will say, good, the battleship's day is done, let it rest. And in pure military terms, they may be right. A 16-inch gun that reaches 24 miles belongs to a different age of warfare. But there is a deeper lesson in these 4 ships, and it's the reason the story matters far beyond nostalgia. A country's power isn't only its ships and its weapons. It's the factories, the skills, and the people standing behind them. The ability to build and to build again. The Iowa-class battleships are a monument to that ability at its absolute peak. And they are a quiet warning about how easily such an ability can slip away. Not stolen, not destroyed, just allowed to fade. One factory and one veteran at a time, until the day a nation reaches for it and finds nothing there. And yet, this is not a story of decline, because the same Navy that can't bring these giants back is right now doing something remarkable. It is designing a brand new battleship for the 21st century. Nuclear powered, armed not with 16-inch guns, but with 128 missile cells and hypersonic weapons. America isn't reviving the old legend because it simply can't. So it's doing the only thing a great naval power can do. It's building the next one, from scratch, for a new century. So the 4 Iowa-class ships will stay where they are, in Los Angeles, in Camden, in Norfolk, and standing watch at Pearl Harbor. Not as weapons waiting to be recalled, but as something rarer, proof of what this country once built, and a challenge to build like that again. The last true battleships will never fire again, but the idea behind them is far from finished. If you want the story of the new one that's coming, I'll see you in the next one.